My son-in-law humiliated me at dinner, telling me this table is only for family, and ordering me to leave, not knowing I actually own the restaurant where he was making his scene. The words cut through the warm ambiance of Nonna's kitchen like a cold blade, silencing conversations at nearby tables as customers turned to witness my public shame. I stood there, 68 years old, being dismissed like some unwanted stranger by a man who'd married into everything I'd built with these two hands. If you've ever been disrespected by someone who owes their success to your sacrifice, if you've ever watched ungrateful people forget where their blessings came from, settle in for this one. Sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are about to learn the hardest lessons of their lives. And if you believe that respect should flow both ways in a family, no matter who's signing the paychecks, hit subscribe on Grandpa's Stories. Tonight's tale is about power, pride, and the sweet taste of justice served at the perfect temperature. The dining room fell silent as Brad's voice carried across the restaurant, my own restaurant, where I'd worked 16-hour days for 35 years to build something meaningful for my family. The red brick walls I'd laid myself seemed to close in around me as other diners stared, some with curiosity, others with the uncomfortable embarrassment that comes from witnessing someone else's family drama. The soft Italian music playing in the background felt mockingly cheerful against the tension crackling through the air. My granddaughter Sophia looked mortified, her 12-year-old face flushed with the kind of second-hand shame that comes from watching adults behave badly. She'd been so excited about her birthday dinner, chattering all week about having the whole family together at Grandpa's restaurant. Now her special night was being ruined by her stepfather's arrogance and cruelty. Maria, my daughter, sat frozen in her chair, caught between loyalty to her father and whatever hold Brad had over her. The irony of the situation would have been funny if it hadn't been so painful. Brad, in his expensive suit and designer shoes, lecturing me about family while sitting at a table in the restaurant I'd built from nothing. The same restaurant that paid for his wife's college education, that funded their wedding, that provided the comfortable lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to. The man who'd never worked a day in food service was telling me I didn't belong in the place where I'd spent half my life perfecting every recipe, training every server, building every relationship that made this business thrive. Marco, my head chef, and one of the few people who knew the real ownership structure, caught my eye from the kitchen doorway. His face was dark with anger at witnessing his boss being treated with such disrespect. He'd been with me for 15 years, had learned everything from my mother's old country recipes to modern kitchen management. Marco understood what this place meant, what it represented, and seeing me humiliated here was like watching someone desecrate a church. The other customers were pretending not to watch, but I could feel their attention like heat from an oven. Some were regulars who'd been coming here for decades, who remembered when I worked the floor myself, greeting every guest personally. They knew me, respected me, and were probably as shocked as I was to witness this public humiliation. Their whispered conversations and pointed looks made Brad's cruelty feel even more shameful, broadcast to an audience who understood exactly what they were witnessing. I looked at my daughter, hoping she'd intervene, hoping she'd remember who'd given her everything she had. But Maria kept her eyes down, studying her hands like they held the secrets of the universe. Her silence was almost worse than Brad's cruelty, because it meant she was choosing him over me, choosing the easy path over what was right. After everything I'd sacrificed for her future, after building this restaurant with the dream of passing it down to her, she was willing to let her husband treat me like garbage rather than risk a confrontation. This restaurant wasn't just a business to me. It was the American dream made real through decades of backbreaking work and unwavering determination. I came to this country in 1978 with nothing but my grandmother's recipes written on index cards and a stubborn belief that good food could build a good life. The building was an abandoned diner then, with grease-stained walls and broken equipment that nobody thought could be salvaged. But I saw potential where others saw problems. Those early years nearly killed me. I worked construction during the day to pay the bills, then came here every night to renovate, repair, and rebuild. My hands were permanently stained with paint and calloused from carrying equipment, but every blister was an investment in something bigger than myself. Rosa, my late wife, would bring me dinner at midnight, finding me still laying tile or rewiring electrical systems. "Antonio," she'd say, "you're building more than a restaurant. You're building a legacy." The first year we opened, we served maybe 20 customers a week. I cooked everything myself, while Rosa handled the front of house with a grace that made even the most demanding customers feel like family. We reinvested every penny back into the business, buying better equipment, improving the recipes, creating the warm atmosphere that would eventually make Nonna's Kitchen the most beloved Italian restaurant in the city. Success came slowly, earned one satisfied customer at a time. Maria grew up in these dining rooms, doing homework at the corner table while I prepped for dinner service. She learned to fold napkins before she could tie her shoes, understood the difference between good olive oil and great olive oil by the time she was 10. This place was her playground, her classroom, her introduction to the values of hard work and hospitality. When she talked about her future, it always included the restaurant. "Someday I'll help you run this place, Papa," she'd promise, and those words kept me motivated through the hardest days. The expansion came in the late 90s when the neighboring storefront became available. I took a massive loan, risking everything we'd built to double our seating capacity and add a private dining room. Rosa was nervous about the debt, but I knew we were ready. The gamble paid off beyond our wildest dreams. Within 2 years, we were booked solid every weekend, hosting wedding receptions and anniversary parties, becoming the place where families celebrated their most important moments. When Rosa got sick, the restaurant became both my refuge and my anchor. The familiar routines of service, the relationships with regular customers, the pride in creating something beautiful from simple ingredients, these things kept me sane during the hardest period of my life. After she died, I threw myself into the business even more completely, working 18-hour days because the alternative was going home to an empty house filled with memories I wasn't ready to face. Maria finished business school and came to work with me full-time, bringing fresh ideas and modern management techniques to complement my old-world approach. Those were good years, father and daughter working side by side, building something together that honored both tradition and innovation. I began planning my retirement, dreaming of the day I could step back and watch my daughter carry on everything Rosa and I had created. The restaurant would stay in the family, the recipes would be preserved, and the legacy would continue for another generation. Brad entered our lives like a well-dressed hurricane, sweeping Maria off her feet with his charm, ambition, and promises of a bigger world beyond the restaurant business. He was a financial advisor with an expensive car and an even more expensive watch. The kind of man who talked about maximizing potential and leveraging assets as if everything in life was just another investment opportunity. Maria was completely smitten, and I tried to be happy for her, even though something about Brad always felt calculated. The engagement was a lavish affair, far more expensive than anything Rosa and I had ever imagined for our daughter's wedding. Brad insisted on the finest of everything. Flowers flown in from Ecuador, a designer dress that cost more than my first year's rent, a reception at the country club that required a second mortgage on the restaurant to afford. "Only the best for my princess," he'd say, but I noticed he never offered to contribute financially to these grand gestures he was orchestrating. From the beginning, Brad viewed the restaurant with the cold eye of someone who saw dollar signs instead of dreams. During our first serious conversation about the business, he'd spread financial statements across my kitchen table like battle plans. pointing out areas where we could optimize efficiency and maximize profit margins. When I tried to explain that some things were more important than money, like treating employees well or using quality ingredients, he'd nod politely and then ignore everything I'd said. The subtle disrespect started almost immediately after the wedding. Brad would arrive at the restaurant talking loudly on his phone about other business deals, treating our dining room like his personal office. He'd snap his fingers at servers, complain about wait times, and make suggestions about improving the customer experience that always seemed to involve spending less money on ingredients or service. The staff began to dread his visits, and I could see them walking on eggshells whenever he was around. Maria changed after marrying Brad, becoming more concerned with appearances and less connected to the heart of what made the restaurant special. She'd adopted his language, talking about profit optimization and brand positioning instead of the passion for hospitality that had always driven our success. When I tried to discuss preserving family recipes or maintaining our relationships with longtime suppliers, she'd defer to Brad's opinion, as if 20 years of restaurant experience was less valuable than his business degree. The real problem started when Maria became pregnant with Sophia. Brad began talking about the restaurant as if it was already his, making long-term plans without consulting me, suggesting changes that would fundamentally alter everything Rosa and I had built. He'd hold forth at family dinners about his vision for expansion, franchising opportunities, corporate partnerships that would take us to the next level. But his version of success looked nothing like the family business I'd spent my life creating. I tried to talk to Maria privately about my concerns, but she'd become defensive, protective of her husband's feelings in ways that seemed to exclude consideration of mine. "Papa, you have to understand. Brad sees opportunities you might not see. He wants to help us grow. But growth for the sake of growth wasn't what I'd had in mind when I'd dreamed of passing this business down to the next generation. I'd wanted to preserve something beautiful, not transform it into just another corporate restaurant chain." The day Brad convinced Maria to ask me to step back from daily operations was one of the darkest of my life. They presented it as a gift. "Papa, you've worked so hard for so many years. Don't you want to enjoy your retirement?" But I could see the calculation behind their concern. They wanted control without the inconvenience of my input, the authority to make changes without having to explain themselves to the man who'd built everything they were inheriting. The transition was painful and awkward. Suddenly, I needed permission to change suppliers I'd worked with for decades. My suggestions about menu items were politely received and quietly ignored. The staff, who'd looked to me for leadership for 35 years, didn't know how to navigate this new hierarchy where the founder was present but powerless. I felt like a ghost, haunting my own creation, visible but unable to impact anything that mattered. Brad's changes came quickly and without consultation. The wine list was restructured to feature more expensive bottles with higher profit margins. Long-time suppliers were replaced with cheaper alternatives that saved money but compromised quality. The warm, family-style service that had always been our trademark was replaced with more efficient but less personal approaches that treated customers like transactions rather than guests. I watched my life's work being slowly transformed into something I no longer recognized. The staff turnover began within months of the new management structure. Experienced servers who'd been with us for years left for other opportunities, unwilling to work under Brad's demanding, disrespectful management style. Marco, my head chef, started talking about opening his own place, frustrated by constant pressure to cut costs on ingredients and reduce preparation time for complex dishes. The family atmosphere that had always been our greatest asset was being systematically dismantled. Maria seemed oblivious to the changes, or perhaps she'd convinced herself they were necessary improvements. When I tried to discuss my concerns, she'd become defensive, accusing me of being resistant to change or unwilling to trust her judgment. "Papa, you taught me to run this business. Now let me run it," she'd say. but the business she was running bore little resemblance to the one I'd taught her to love. The financial success that Brad had promised never materialized. Despite all the cost-cutting measures and efficiency improvements, profits remained flat while customer satisfaction declined. Regular customers began complaining about changes in food quality, longer wait times, and the loss of the personal service that had always made Nonna's kitchen special. But Brad's response was always to implement more cost-cutting measures rather than address the underlying problems his management style had created. I found myself spending less and less time at the restaurant, unable to watch the daily deterioration of everything Rosa and I had built. My retirement, which should have been a time of pride and relaxation, became a period of mourning for the loss of my life's work. The building was still there, the name was still the same, but the soul of the place was dying under management that valued profit over people, efficiency over excellence, control over community. Sophia's 12th birthday dinner was supposed to be a celebration, a rare opportunity for our fractured family to come together and focus on something joyful. She'd specifically requested dinner at the restaurant, telling me over the phone that she missed spending time there with Grandpa, that she wanted to hear stories about the old days when Grandma Rosa was still alive and the restaurant was more fun. Her innocent words cut deep because they confirmed what I'd been feeling but hadn't wanted to admit. The evening started pleasantly enough. Sophia was radiant in her birthday dress, chattering excitedly about school and friends while we waited for our table. She'd insisted on the corner booth where she used to do homework as a little girl, the same spot where Maria had spent countless afternoons learning about the restaurant business. For a moment, surrounded by my daughter and granddaughter, I felt hopeful that maybe this dinner would remind us all of what family meant. But the atmosphere shifted the moment Brad arrived, already agitated about something that had happened at his office. He was checking his phone constantly, making it clear that being here was an obligation rather than a choice. When Sophia tried to tell him about a school project, he held up a finger to silence her while he finished reading an email. The dismissal of his stepdaughter's excitement set the tone for everything that followed. The service that evening was different from what I remembered from my days running the floor. The servers seemed hurried, less attentive, more focused on turning tables than creating memorable experiences. Our waiter was new, unfamiliar with the menu details, and unable to answer Sophia's questions about ingredients in her favorite dishes. When I tried to help by explaining the preparation methods I'd taught the kitchen staff, Brad interrupted with visible annoyance. "Tony," he said, using the abbreviated version of my name that I'd always disliked, "you don't work here anymore. Let the staff do their jobs." The casual disrespect in front of my granddaughter stung, but I let it pass, not wanting to create a scene on Sophia's special night. But I could see the confusion in her eyes, wondering why her stepfather was speaking to Grandpa with such disdain, why the restaurant felt different than it used to when we visited together. The breaking point came when I excused myself to go speak with Marco about Sophia's birthday dessert, wanting to make sure the kitchen prepared the special tiramisu she'd been anticipating. It was a simple grandfather's gesture, the kind of personal touch that had always made celebrations at Nonna's kitchen memorable. But when I returned to the table, Brad was waiting with the fury of a man whose authority had been challenged. That's when he delivered the words that would change everything between us. "This table is only for family. You don't work here anymore, you don't make decisions here, and you're making everyone uncomfortable with your interference. I think it's time for you to leave." The public humiliation was complete, delivered in front of my granddaughter, my daughter, and a dining room full of customers who'd watched me build this place from nothing. In that moment, I realized that Brad had been waiting for an excuse to put me in my place, and I'd given him the perfect opportunity. The silence that followed Brad's ultimatum was deafening. Even the background music seemed to pause as the weight of his words settled over our table and the surrounding diners. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, not understanding why her birthday dinner had become a battlefield, why Grandpa was being told to leave the restaurant she'd always considered his. Maria sat frozen, her face pale with the realization that her husband had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I stood slowly, my legs steadier than I'd expected, despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. For 35 years, I dreamed of the moment when I could step back and watch the next generation carry on my legacy. But I'd never imagined it would feel like being exiled from my own creation, dismissed by someone who'd contributed nothing to its success, but felt entitled to control its future. Brad's satisfied smirk told me he thought he'd won some kind of victory. "You're absolutely right, Brad," I said quietly, my voice carrying further than I'd intended in the hushed dining room. "This table is only for family. And you're also right that I don't work here anymore." I could see confusion beginning to replace the smugness on his face as he tried to understand why I was agreeing with him instead of arguing or leaving in shame. "But there's something I think you should know before I go." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying, the documents my lawyer had prepared for what I'd hoped would be a peaceful transition conversation. Instead, they would serve a very different purpose tonight. "You see, Brad, while it's true that I don't work here anymore, and while it's true that Maria manages the day-to-day operations, there's one small detail that seems to have gotten lost in all your planning for the future." The dining room had gone completely silent now, other conversations stopping as customers sensed the drama unfolding at our table. Marco had emerged from the kitchen, along with several other staff members who'd heard raised voices and come to investigate. Giuseppe, my old friend and business partner, was standing near the bar where he'd been having his usual evening wine, his weathered face creased with concern and growing understanding of what was about to happen. "I still own this restaurant, Brad, all of it. Every brick I laid, every recipe I perfected, every relationship I built over 35 years. Maria manages it beautifully. But the deed, the business license, the liquor license, the trademark on the name, they're all still in my name." I placed the ownership documents on the table, spread them out like the hand of cards that would change everything. "So, when you say this table is only for family, you're sitting in my restaurant at my table, telling the owner that he doesn't belong." Brad's face went through a series of color changes, from confusion to realization to something approaching panic. He'd spent 2 years making plans for a business he thought he controlled, treating the founder like an inconvenient relic, operating under the assumption that legal ownership had transferred along with operational management. His carefully constructed sense of authority was crumbling in real time as he began to understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. Maria looked at the documents with dawning horror, realizing that her husband had just publicly humiliated the man who still held the power to destroy everything they'd built their future plans around. "Papa," she whispered, we thought you'd transferred." But she couldn't finish the sentence because the truth was too devastating. They'd assumed I'd given up legal control because I'd given up daily control, and they'd never bothered to verify the distinction. The aftermath of that revelation spread through the restaurant like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Other diners weren't even pretending not to watch anymore, fascinated by the real-life drama unfolding better than any television show. Brad sat speechless, his face cycling through shades of red as the implications of his situation became clear. The man who'd spent 2 years treating me like an outdated employee had just learned he'd been disrespecting the person who could end his comfortable lifestyle with a single phone call. Sophia, bless her heart, was the first to break the tension. "Grandpa," she said in a small voice, "does this mean you're not leaving?" I looked at my granddaughter, saw the confusion and hope warring in her eyes, and made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of the dramatic exit Brad had orchestrated, I sat back down, picked up my menu, and smiled at the man who'd tried to banish me from my own establishment. "You know what, Sophia? I think I'll stay for dessert after all. It is your birthday, and this is our family restaurant. The emphasis on our wasn't lost on anyone at the table. But first, I think your stepfather and I need to have a conversation about respect, family, and the difference between managing a business and owning one. Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. All his corporate confidence evaporated in the face of his complete miscalculation. The next few days brought changes that had been 35 years in the making. I called a family meeting, not in the restaurant, but in the lawyer's office, where we established new ground rules for everyone involved. Maria would continue as manager, but with the clear understanding that major decisions required consultation with the actual owner. Brad's unofficial authority over restaurant operations was officially terminated, along with his habit of treating staff and family members with casual disrespect. More importantly, I implemented changes that honored both tradition and progress. Marco was promoted to executive chef with a partnership stake in the business, recognizing his years of loyalty and culinary expertise. The original suppliers were contacted and relationships renewed. The menu was restored to include the traditional dishes Brad had eliminated in favor of cheaper alternatives. The warm, family-style service that had always been our trademark was reinstated as the gold standard for every interaction. Giuseppe and I spent long evenings planning the restaurant's future in ways that preserved its soul while allowing for growth. We established a scholarship fund for culinary students, created a mentorship program for young immigrants wanting to learn the restaurant business, and began work on a cookbook that would preserve Rosa's recipes for future generations. These weren't just business decisions, they were investments in the values that had always made Nonna's kitchen more than just a place to eat. The relationship with Maria is slowly healing, complicated by her embarrassment over the birthday dinner incident and her gradual realization of how much Brad's influence had changed her priorities. We have coffee together every Tuesday morning now, just the two of us, talking about the restaurant but also about life, family, and what it means to carry on a legacy responsibly. She's beginning to remember the passion that brought her into the business in the first place. As for Brad, well, he learned that respect can't be demanded or assumed, it has to be earned. His attempts to assert control over something he'd never owned taught him a valuable lesson about the difference between authority and arrogance. He's more careful with his words now, more aware that actions have consequences, especially when you're dealing with people who've spent decades building what you're trying to control in months. Tell me, have you ever had to remind someone that respect flows both ways, regardless of age or position? Have you watched people take credit for success they didn't create, only to learn the hard way where the real power lies? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the sweetest justice comes from simply telling the truth at exactly the right moment. And if this tale of family, respect, and restaurant justice satisfied your appetite, subscribe to Grandpa's Stories. Life's too short to let people treat you like you don't matter, especially in the place you built with your own two hands.